With her life shrouded in mist, unable to see a friend from an enemy, Do-hee runs through the darkness, rushing toward a figure in the night. Flashing back 200 years, we find ourselves surrounded by praying believers when suddenly a demon named Jeong Gu-won shows up killing the candles. The believers panic and even more chaos ensues as blood writing appears on the wall. Leaving a red rose on the pulpit the next day, Gu-won finds a hungry fisherman by the waterside. With the fisherman complaining about the lack of fish, Gu-won offers the man all the fish he could ever fish, in exchange, however, for his soul, meaning the fisherman will die in 10 years and be sent to hell. With the man accepting the deal, they seal a blood contract. When we go back to Do-hee in 2023, she's just won CEO of the Year for her role as the head of Marries FNB. However, despite her success, Do-hee can't help but think that someone in the Marries group is trying to sabotage her, especially as she doesn't exactly get along with the other members of her adopted family who had taken her in after her parents had passed away. In fact, the only one she had a bond with was the family's matriarch, Cheon-sook. However, at the moment, she was even annoyed with her as Cheon-sook was forcing her to go on a blind date. But there's a mistake with the date's location, and Do-hee ends up going to the wrong hotel and disrupting Gu-won after another long day of demoning, thinking that he is her date. Assuming that Gu-won and all of his bad attitude of being interrupted is just another pompous date that she has to get through to make her grandmother happy, Do-hee refuses to leave. But Gu-won and Do-hee don't get along at all. And then when a group of mafia men, a very long story, barge in, a cake almost falls on Do-hee. Gu-won manages to save both the cake and catch Do-hee, causing her heart to flutter as she mistakenly thinks he saved her and got the cake for her birthday, and she couldn't help but admit that he is very handsome. Coming back from the bathroom to see Gu-won eating the cake alone, she asked shocked why he was eating without her, and he coldly responded that he didn't care that it was her birthday, all he wanted to have was his free time back. Do-hee storms out, and she couldn't believe that a person this rude can exist. A while later, a drunk Do-hee calls for a driver. Waking up in the back seat and looking down at her phone, Do-hee was startled to see that she'd gotten in the wrong car. The driver she'd called was not the one who was driving her, and asking the man who she is, the driver spine-chillingly replies that she should ask why she is about to die. Trying to cover her mouth with a chloroform-dipped cloth, Do-hee pushes past the man and starts running through the misty night. Gu-won, looking for a new target and sensing her fear, teleports to the road and tries to make a deal with her. But with the man, who we find out is named Gwang-cho, chasing her, they get caught in a big struggle that ends with Do-hee falling into the ocean and Gu-won jumping in after her. Finding herself sinking into the darkness, Do-hee struggles to bring herself and Gu-won, who had passed out, to the surface as she tries to drag him, and the demon mask, a cross tattoo, transfers from Gu-won's wrist onto her own. Opening her eyes in the hospital, Da-jeon, Do-hee's assistant, tells her that she'd been asleep for 5 hours, and once Da-jeon leaves, Gu-won also informs her that he told the police about the man who'd attacked her the night before. Despite their bickering, Do-hee and Gu-won have great chemistry, and shifting the conversation to the tattoo after Do-hee falls to rub it off and even mentions lasering it off, Gu-won stops her, and he has to get his tattoo back safely because without it, he is without his powers, and a demon who doesn't make new deals starts to burst into flames. So in the next few days, Gu-won tries to find any information he can about the tattoo transfer and even enlists Bok-gyu, the director of the Sun-Woo Foundation, who basically works as Go-woo's assistant to find out everything he has about Do-hee's background. Still unable to use his powers when he holds her wrist, Gu-won invites Do-hee on a stroll along the river, and misunderstanding his behavior as interest in her, Do-hee can't be more surprised when out of nowhere, he pushes her into the water. You see, desperate to get his powers back, Gu-won had been thinking of every possible solution, and he pushed Do-hee into the river to see if maybe it was the water that had caused the tattoo to move. But soaking wet, Do-hee starts to cry, and why was everyone being so unfair to her? Finally, having enough, Do-hee throws a pile of money at him and storms away, and she doesn't owe Jeong Gu-won anything anymore. But with his powers still not back, Gu-won doesn't have the luxury of cutting off Do-hee and continues to keep an eye on her, and it's a good thing he does because a few days later, when Do-hee tries to cross the road after a day at the office, someone tries to pour acid on her, but luckily, Gu-won shows up just in time to save her. Explaining that he needed to protect the tattoo, Do-hee was amazed when she sees him grab her wrist and heal himself instantly from the acid's injuries. Who or what was Gu-won? And after he explains that he is a demon, they go and report this new attack to the police. Do-hee, still bewildered that Gu-won is an actual demon, comes up with a suggestion. If Gu-won worked as her bodyguard, then he could be close to her to protect her and the tattoo. It's kind of a win-win situation. Despite constantly worrying about her, Gu-won rejects her offer. How could he, an immortal being, be the bodyguard of a human? Ridiculous. Later that night, Do-hee watches the news, sees the Marries Group head of finance, Mr. Shaw, who had cryptically called her earlier and promised to give her critical information, had apparently offed himself, or had he? At the same time, we see Cheon-sook speaking to a man wearing a leather jacket, warning him that by killing someone, he had gone too far. The man leaves angry, and the next morning, Gu-won wakes up with an idea. If he recreates the conditions of the night that he lost it, including waiting 28 days for the next full moon, he might be able to get the tattoo back. So Gu-won decides to take Do-hee up on her suggestion of being her bodyguard in the meantime, meaning Do-hee and Gu-won agree that if their fates are going to be so interlinked, then they have to work together. Which of course also means fully understanding what the other does. So to properly explain what being a demon is like, Gu-won takes Do-hee to his favorite lookout spot and transports them to a hospital. As Gu-won makes a deal with a mother to heal her dying child in exchange for her soul, Do-won was shocked. Isn't Gu-won exploiting people's desperation? What did the mother do to deserve to go to hell? After arguing, Do-hee fires him as her bodyguard and storms away, but the interaction continues to bother both Do-hee and Gu-won. Gu-won, for one, goes back to the hospital and sees the girls say that she doesn't want her parents to have a hard time because of her. Seeing the family was so happy to have their daughter alive, Do-hee starts to understand why Gu-won does what he does, so she rehires him as her bodyguard. Throughout the next few days, Gu-won settles into a routine as Do-hee's bodyguard, even befriending some of the office employees at work. As Do-hee and Gu-won bicker and tease each other, a message from Cheon-sook saying she loves Do-hee and it's her time to go comes through, stopping Do-hee in her tracks. Rushing to Cheon-sook's greenhouse, where she spent a lot of time carrying her plants, Do-hee and Gu-won find Cheon-sook dead. According to the police, Cheon-sook had taken a drug she was allergic to instead of her daily medicine. Devastated, Do-hee mourns her death, and Gu-won can't do anything but watch helplessly as Do-hee's heart breaks. As for the funeral, well, it becomes an excuse for the family to play out their power struggles, the only exception being Seok-hun, the family's nephew, who also might or might not have feelings for Do-hee. As the funeral comes, of course, the reading of the will, with everyone thinking Cheon-sook would have left everything to her oldest son, Suk-min. The family is shocked when it's revealed that she actually left it to Do-hee. However, there is one condition, and she had to get married in a year. Hearing this, Do-hee turns around, walks up to Gu-won, and with the rings that Cheon-sook had given her, proposes to him. Gu-won was shocked, and with no intention of getting married in front of all her family, he turns her down. Do-hee was stunned, arriving home afterward despite initially trying to play the whole situation chill. Do-hee was furious and hurt and lonely, and meanwhile Gu-won was desperately trying to deny to himself and Book-gyu that he could be falling in love with a human of all things. When her proposal rejection goes viral, Do-hee calls Gu-won. She can't believe that she'd been made a laughingstock and continuing to bicker about the proposal. As they were going home, Do-hee ends up talking about her life, and when she falls asleep, Gu-won puts Jeong-suk's letter, which she'd picked up earlier, in her bag. At her door, he encourages her to rely on him, and at the same time, Gu-won had begun getting more and more of his memories from before he had turned into a demon. Was Gu-won becoming human again? Reading the letter from Jeong-suk, Do-hee was moved, and especially when Suk-min refuses to allow a post-mortem on Jeong-suk's body, Do-hee becomes determined to find out the truth behind Jeong-suk's death. She wouldn't have taken the pills that she was allergic to on purpose. What was really going on? With Gu-won needing to recharge by holding her wrists together, Do-hee and Gu-won are forced to bond as they try to investigate what really happened to Jeong-suk, but unfortunately, the pair are faced with a bunch of roadblocks. For example, Gu-won can't transport to the Gwangchol because, in order to do that, he needs to have seen his face, and since the Gwangchol was wearing a mask, he can't do that. One night after the company dinner, in the middle of an argument, Do-hee turns to say something to Gu-won when she sees him gone. Searching around, she finds him being attacked by the mafia men from earlier. Holding her wrist, Do-hee and Gu-won fight the men off using an amazing tango showdown, and Gu-won secretly starts to wonder to himself if he's really grown feelings for Do-hee. Realizing that he's falling for Do-hee, Gu-won reacts with denial and coldness, puzzling Do-hee to the point that she goes to the Sun-woo Foundation one night, unable to calm her curiosity about what was behind this sudden change. Gu-won's sudden appearance and accusatory tone surprised her, and their conversation was interrupted by Ga-young, a main traditional artist who works for the foundation and who has a major crush on Gu-won, who flirts with him, which stokes Do-hee's jealousy. But in the end, Gu-won's cold words push Do-hee away as she resolves to just focus on herself, and at the same time, Gwangchol leaves the footage that he'd recorded of Gu-won and Do-hee at the exchange spot and tests his accomplice, a mysterious person named Abraxas, to check a specific locker. Gwangchol promises Abraxas that he will get the job done despite Gu-won's interference. The strained relationship between Do-hee and Gu-won is obvious to everyone, leading to misunderstandings and further complications. Especially as Suk-hoon shares that he had found something suspicious in the company's financial records, and feeling the pressure to get married and claim her rightful place as the head of the Mirai group, Do-hee agrees to marry the first man she can find, who turns out to be the lawyer who she'd initially been scheduled to meet on the blind date, where she'd run into Gu-won. On the ride back, Gu-won, going crazy with jealousy, continues to act indifferent and says he won't care what Do-hee does anymore. Instead, he turns his attention to locating Gwangchol and finding the mafia guy. Gu-won darkly threatens him to find Gwangchol. Seeing Gu-won like this freaks Do-hee out, and in a fit of rage and frustration, mixed with their own personal feelings, they decide to stop working together. But fate had a different idea, and arriving home, Do-hee was weirded out when she hears music playing in her apartment. Suddenly attacked from behind by Gwangchol, when Do-hee wakes up, she finds herself hanging from her balcony roof. With Do-hee screaming for help, Gwangchol starts cutting the sheet that was tying her to the railing just as she was about to fall. Gu-won, appearing out of nowhere, jumps over the balcony and grabs her wrist.
Hanging from the side of her own apartment building, Do-hee can hear blood in her ears as she hopes and prays that someone will come and save her. As it turns out, in a few seconds before she passed out, Do-hee had managed to call her emergency contact. Seeing her call, Gu-won rushes to the rooftop and grabs Do-hee. Fighting Gwangchol, who attacks him, Gu-won loses his grip, and together he and Do-hee fall off the building. Holding on to Do-hee's wrist, Gu-won luckily uses his powers and they teleport to the stairwell. Back at the house, after Gu-won makes sure that Gwangchol was really gone, Do-hee points out that Gwangchol seemed more interested in terrorizing her than just killing her, orchestrating everything including the music to maximize her fear. Checking the security footage, Gu-won and Do-hee and Seok-hun, who had also been one of her emergency contacts but arrived once all the action was over, came to a sinking realization that Gwang-chol had been wearing a disguise, and that's why it's been so hard to find him. Pulling Gu-won aside, Seok-hun demands to know what secrets they're hiding. Their argument escalates and Seok-hun basically confesses his feelings for Do-hee. Later, Seok-hun finds Do-hee grappling with the trauma of her near-death experience on the balcony, and when Seok-hun proposes to her, Gu-won interrupts with his own proposal, leaving Do-hee flabbergasted. After only a few days since he rejected her proposal, Gu-won was now proposing? What's really going on here? In response, Do-hee says she needs time to think it all through. Assuming that she's going to naturally agree to his proposal automatically, Gu-won grows more and more annoyed as the next day goes on with no word from Do-hee. Meanwhile, Gu-won also becomes increasingly jealous when he sees Seok-hun visiting Do-hee's office with flowers, especially after spotting them laughing together. Little does Gu-won know that Do-hee had no romantic feelings for Seok-hun whatsoever, and she explains as much to Seok-hun after he confesses that he really likes her. As for Do-hee, she had made up her mind, and much to the surprise of everyone, Do-hee announces in front of all her family that she'll be getting married the next day to Gu-won. The wedding was straight out of a fairy tale, outside of the fact that the bride and groom have signed a contract in which they will have to act like the perfect couple but will break up once Do-hee brings down Gwang-chol and Gu-won gets his powers back. Now a married couple, Gu-won moves to Do-hee's apartment, and although they sleep in different rooms, Gu-won can't help but fall for Do-hee more and more. At the same time, suspicious of Do-gi-young's recent behavior, Do-hee gets Gu-won's help to tail him, and they end up following him all the way to the subway station. However, just as Do-gi-young spots them in the photo booth, Gu-won's power fail, and he ends up kissing Do-hee to hide their faces. Grabbing the photo strip from the booth, Gu-won hurries after Do-hee. At the bus station, they meet a mysterious beggar lady who warns Gu-won and Do-hee that something around them is flickering and is bound to go out soon. Ignoring the woman, they go about the rest of their day. However, Gu-won starts to become worried. Even when he is holding Do-hee's wrist, his powers have started growing weaker. Blaming Do-hee for his weakening powers, Gu-won and Do-hee end up arguing after Bok-gyu arrives with Gu-won's stuff. Unwilling to compromise, Gu-won leaves with his things, sitting in the car in the parking lot. Meanwhile, Gwang-chol sneaks into the Sunwool Foundation building and steals Gu-won's demon manual. Later, Gu-won confides in Bok-gyu his worries that his reoccurring dream about his past might be linked to his powers flickering, and Bok-gyu, on the other hand, wonders if Gu-won is becoming human, experiencing emotions like guilt, compassion, and love. Of course, Gu-won refuses to admit his feelings for Do-hee and tries to instead convince himself that everything will return to normal once he gets his tattoo back. A good while later, Gu-won, having made up with Do-hee, invites her to come and watch Ga-young's rehearsal performance, and as they watch, Gu-won gets distracted by a memory of a dancing lady from his past, and when the rehearsal performance was over, Gu-won rushes out, drawn to a painting that triggers his memory. With Do-hee leaving and Gu-won staying to see the final performance, Gwang-chol updates his accomplice, most likely Do-gi-young, about Gu-won being a demon and his plan to kill him. During the final performance, Gu-won gets a call. Do-hee had just been arrested for murdering Jeong-sook. Rushing outside, Gu-won doesn't get far before he is stabbed by none other than Gwang-chol, who continues stabbing him again and again. With Do-hee and the cross tattoo stuck at the police station, is Gu-won really going to die? Luckily, Bok-gyu shows up, and shoving Gwang-chol off of Gu-won, Gu-won manages to catch a glimpse of Gwang-chol's real face as his mask slips and reporters swarm around. Meanwhile, news of Gu-won's stabbing reaches Do-hee at the police station. Detective Kyung-soo, who knows she is innocent, promises Do-hee that she will be released soon due to a lack of evidence, and helps her sneak out to visit Gu-won at the hospital. There at the hospital, Gu-won was in a dire condition, and Do-hee was worried she might be too late, and she stays by his side until Gu-won, holding onto her wrist, regains consciousness. When she sees him awake, Do-hee breaks down in tears, and the next morning, Do-hee's arrest warrant is dismissed, which allows her to go back to the hospital and take care of Gu-won, who brightens up the second he sees her. In the following days, Gu-won insists on following Do-hee to work despite his condition. One morning, Gu-won hides his painkillers from Do-hee and drives her to a board meeting, but is shocked to hear that she's declaring her withdrawal from the CEO candidacy. While the rest of the family celebrates this news, Do-hee explains to Gu-won that it's too dangerous of a game to play since she can't trust him to protect her when he can't even protect himself. Still frustrated and confused, Gu-won goes to find Seok-hun to ask him why he didn't show up to the meeting. Seok-hun explains that Do-hee gave up her candidacy to protect Gu-won, worried that she'll lose him like everyone else she loved. Tracking her down in Cheol-suk's garden, Gu-won kisses Do-hee, and despite her warning that he will die if he gets involved in her war, Gu-won doesn't care. Admitting their deep feelings for each other, Do-hee and Gu-won start dating like a normal couple. As they enjoy breakfast at the hotel where they met and go on a date along the Han River, Gu-won was surprised by the depth of his feelings for Do-hee and even becomes sulky when she hesitates to call him hubby. At the same time, Seok-min orders the shareholders to hurry the special stakeholders meeting to elect a new chairperson. On the ride home, Do-gi-young receives a message on his second phone and lies to his father, explaining that the second phone is for girls. But Seok-min was suspicious. In the car, Seok-min also gets a mysterious call from someone named Enforcer, who asks why he has been so quiet. The next day, Do-hee and Gu-won's honeymoon glow is interrupted when Da-ji-young informs Do-hee that Seok-min had sent the legal papers for her to renounce her inheritance. Gu-won tries to convince her to reconsider and promises to protect her, but Do-hee insists that signing the papers is a small price to pay in exchange for her peace of mind. Deciding to turn all of his attention to finding Gwang-chol, the source of Do-hee's anxiety, Gu-won gets the mafia men to find the bad guy. After a search by the police and the mafia men, Gu-won eventually gets called, and apparently they found him. However, when they arrive at the grimy apartment where Gwang-chol was living, they find him burned to a crisp. As it turned out, Gwang-chol had actually been working with Seok-min, not Do-gi-young, this whole time, and it had been Seok-min who had killed him. Finding the bug that Gwang-chol had planted in his office, Gu-won becomes more determined than ever to find out who is really behind all of this. But this time has finally come, and while talking to Bokyu, Gu-won suddenly realizes that his powers are gone completely when the clocks in his office, symbolizing the contracts that he's made, stop. Desperate, Gu-won visits the beggar woman at the bus station, who takes him to a restaurant and reveals that she is God. She informs him that he has turned fully human, and the only way for him to get his powers back is for Do-hee to die. And apparently, only one of them can live. Back home, Gu-won tries to pretend to be happy for Do-hee, eating Do-hee's salty cake, discussing the end of the world, and falling asleep while watching a movie together. Determined to change their fate, Gu-won visits God again and makes a bet with her. If he can get his powers back, then Do-hee gets to live. The next morning, Gu-won tells Do-hee about the full moon and his plan to get his tattoo back. Do-hee excitedly suggests that they use their trip to Sokcho as a honeymoon, and later, Ga-young, who has put together what is really going on, angrily goes to confront Do-hee and gives her poison to die instead, which just confuses Do-hee. To find out what's going on, Do-hee goes to visit Bokyu, who explains to her the ultimatum the god has given Gu-won. Reassuring Gu-won that they will face the challenges together, Do-hee and Gu-won head to the beach. At the gas station, Do-hee stops to buy a postcard and cake, but chaos ensues when Do-gi-young comes crashing his car into the convenience store, setting it ablaze. As it turned out, Seok-min had found out about Do-gi-young cloning his phone and responded by torturing his son using an iron rod. Set on making his son useful to him, Seok-min demands that Do-gi-young prove his worth, which drives Do-gi-young to crash into the shop. With the shop in flames and Do-hee still inside, naturally, Gu-won rushes in. Inside the burning building, Gu-won sees a goodbye letter from Do-hee, and she'd been planning to sacrifice herself. Hit by a falling piece of debris, Gu-won passes out. Gaining consciousness again, Gu-won manages to reach Do-hee as soon as he holds her hand, and the tattoo moves onto his wrist, and using his powers, Gu-won rescues himself and Do-hee out of the burning building. Once safe and sound again, Gu-won explains how the tattoo was transferred back to him. Do-hee couldn't believe her ears. Does this mean all of their struggles might be coming to an end? The next morning, Gu-won wakes up in high spirits, his powers restored, and his beloved Do-hee by his side. Although Do-hee reassures him that she is fine, Gu-won remains concerned about her well-being as they prepare for the day together, even matching their outfits. With his powers back, Gu-won had to of course return to demoning, and so while Do-hee was working, he goes out to find a human to make a deal with, and ends up meeting an old man who was willing to make a deal in exchange for his sick wife to recognize him one last time. Although Gu-won agrees, he struggles to understand why the man would agree to an eternity in hell for just a few minutes, and watching the old couple, Gu-won was deeply touched and even sheds a tear. Is Gu-won still turning human? That night, Gu-won again dreams about the woman from his past who's named Wolsham. Although he can't see her face, he can recognize her by her cross necklace, and bothered by this dream, Gu-won goes and questions God about it the next day. But instead of giving him a straight answer, God asks him to think about why he erased those memories in the first place. The memories must have been very painful to him. She also warns him that fate repeats itself, and back at the office, Seok-min, upset that Do-hee survived the accident, visits her under the guise of wanting to help her business, and even brings along an old photo of her parents with Jeong-suk. On his way out, Seok-min notices that the tattoo has returned to Gu-won, and looking at the photo, Do-hee confides in Gu-won, explaining how she blamed herself, thinking that her father got into the accident, given that he was speeding home because she was being difficult. Meanwhile, Seok-hun, suspicious of Seok-min's motives, visits his family and discovers the hidden demon manual, although by the time Gu-won and Do-hee teleport to the house to get the book, it was missing again. At dinner, Seok-min lies by saying that Do-kyung was in the US when in reality he was recovering from the crash of the other night. Seok-min intends to, once he is healed, make Do-kyung fess up to being behind Cheon-suk and Gwang-chol's murder. When Do-hee later hears that Do-kyung had gone to the police station and confessed, she was furious. She can't just imagine that a brat like Do-kyung was really behind everything that had happened, and that night again, Gu-won dreams of Wolsham. However, this time he sees her face and it's Do-hee's face, and in the dream we see flashes that look like Gu-won, who was the one who killed Wolsham. Waking up in a cold sweat, Gu-won looks over at Do-hee with fear in his eyes, and it is here we ask, will fate really repeat itself as God warned? Flashing back to 200 years ago, meet young Yi-sun, a charming, handsome, and privileged young man living in the Joseon area. Adorned by the whole village, Yi-sun is known around town for slacking off and avoiding his studies, much to the frustration of his strict father. Despite his carefree attitude, Yi-sun's natural charisma and wit make him a favorite amongst the villagers. One day, while skipping his lessons to enjoy the flowers by the river, Yi-sun stumbles upon Wolsham, a pretty young woman practicing her sword dance by the river's edge. Enchanted by her grace and beauty, Yi-sun was determined to win her attention, even after learning she's a former Kisang, aka an enslaved woman who was trained to be a courtesan, and Kisangs were known to have the lowest status in society. Despite wanting nothing to do with him at first, Yi-sun's persistent visits eventually draw Wolsham's attention. As Yi-sun and Wolsham grow closer, she reveals her harrowing past. Wolsham had been sent to the village after refusing to dance for a powerful man in Han-young. Despite her gratitude for escaping with her life, Wolsham is fully aware of her low status and its limitations on her future. For example, having the lowest status in society means that she can never ever dream of marrying Yi-sun, no matter how much he flirts with her. However, Yi-sun starts to think differently and turning to Catholicism, a new religion in Korea that just arrived on the peninsula from overseas missionaries. Yi-sun and Wolsham embrace its teachings that all human beings are equal under God, a stark contrast to the Confucian values that they grew up with. Joining the faith, Wolsham and Yi-sun start spending more and more time together and promise to get married after Yi-sun finishes his state exam, giving Wolsham a cross necklace as a promise. However, their dreams are shattered when Yi-sun's father learns of his Catholic faith and his relationship with Wolsham. The village elders, afraid that the spread of Catholicism will threaten their traditional hierarchical Confucian values, launch a brutal attack against the religion and its believers, and in a tragic turn of events, Yi-sun's father sacrifices Wolsham. Never giving up Yi-sun's name, Wolsham is arrested and sentenced to be executed. Hearing this, Yi-sun rushes home, however he is too late, and ends up having to watch Wolsham die when she was slashed across the chest by a sword. In a fit of fury and rage, Yi-sun, having lost faith in God and humanity, kills everyone before taking his own life. Back in the present, Gu-won wakes up from his dream with the weight on his shoulders, and he feels burdened by the guilt, blaming himself for introducing Wolsham to the Catholic faith, which is what got her killed. And he worries that he might hurt Do-hee in the same way if his faith is destined to repeat itself. Going to visit God again, God explains to Gu-won that it was his grudge against humans caused by the tragedy that he'd experienced that made him the perfect choice to become a demon. She also warns Gu-won that although his connected faith with Do-hee was stirring up trouble, he must face the consequences of his actions. Gu-won returns to his office more frustrated and confused than ever, and as for Do-hee, she was surprised to hear that Do-gi-young had died in prison from an apparent suicide, although it's kind of unlikely. After the funeral, Gu-won and Do-hee go to pay their respects to Jeong-sook and go to see Ga-young perform. While watching Ga-young's sword fighting, Gu-won was reminded of Wolsham and confesses to Do-hee about the people he killed in his past and how worried he is that he'll make her unhappy. Grateful that he's finally opened up to her about what's been bothering him, Do-hee reassures Gu-won that their love can survive whatever fate has in store. The next day, Gu-won and Do-hee start to plan their first Christmas together. However, despite a great breakfast on their way to work, they see a car accident that reminds Do-hee of her parents' deaths. This is also coupled with her increasing guilt about feeling happy and her fear of losing Gu-won, which really brings down her mood. Wanting to make his wife feel carefree and happy that night, Gu-won uses his powers to transform Do-hee's nightmare into a beautiful dream. In the dream, Do-hee reunited with her parents and Jeong-sook in a beautiful Christmas scene, and the next morning, Gu-won brings home a Christmas tree, and while Do-hee might miss her real family, she still has her complicated adoptive relatives to deal with as she and Gu-won prepare for a tense family dinner at Seok-min's house. The dinner turns ugly when Do-hee and Seok-hun refuse to give their shares of the company and storm out. Even Soo-on hesitates to just hand over her shares. At dinner, Gu-won also notices a burn mark on Si-ra, but he keeps it quiet. However, when Si-ra was hospitalized, he decides to go and visit her to ask if she, perhaps, knows anything about where the demon manual is. She'd actually found the book hidden in Seok-min's safe while she was snooping around. You see, while Seok-min had been consolidating his power at the company, his wife Si-ra had been mourning the death of their son. With nothing to lose anymore, Si-ra confesses that Seok-min was responsible for multiple murders, including his own mother's and Do-gi-young's. Seok-min was the real bad guy, not Do-gi-young. At the same time, Do-hee confronts Seok-min in his office, and he responds by dropping a bombshell. Seok-min reveals that it was Jeong-sook who was behind Do-hee's parents' death. Seok-min even plays a recording of Do-hee's father threatening Jeong-sook, who had just reduced employees' welfare to get an investment for the company. Refusing to believe him, Do-hee ends up getting into a fight with Seok-min, and being choked by Seok-min, Do-hee struggles to stay awake. Arriving just in time, Gu-won saves Do-hee, and as Seok-min's bodyguard try and break down the door, he teleports them all to his favorite rooftop lookout spot, and on the rooftop, Seok-min confidently taunts Gu-won with the fact that according to the demon manual, demons can't directly kill humans. Despite Do-hee begging Seok-min to give it up, he remains defiant. That is, until Gu-won reveals that Si-ra was heading to the police station with damning evidence that proves that he is guilty. Realizing his situation, Seok-min suddenly changes his tune and starts begging Gu-won to make a contract with him to keep his crimes a secret. Of course, Gu-won refuses, and deciding that death is better than prison, Seok-min flings himself off the building and falls into the darkness. Despite the fact that they never find Seok-min's body, the shocking news of Seok-min's crimes and death creates a media storm around Do-hee and the company. Even the police detectives are surprised by all the dirt that comes out, and with Soo-min supposedly dead, Do-hee can't shake his assertion that Cheon-suk was somehow behind her parents' death. Do-hee decides that the only way to calm her mind was to dive deeper into Cheon-suk's past and find out what really happened, but Do-hee was ready to unpack a new can of worms. Investigating further, Do-hee visits the church where Cheon-suk always used to go to. At the church, the priest reveals to Do-hee the truth. Her parents were indeed blackmailing Cheon-suk, and that is what led to the fatal car crash. The priest also explains that Do-hee's father had a contract with Gu-won, which he'd signed 10 years ago. Knowing that he still wanted to say goodbye to Do-hee before he died when Cheon-suk chased after their car, Do-hee's father and mother, who had been riding in the passenger seat, got into an accident. With Cheon-suk watching everything from the sidelines, Gu-won showed up in the front of Do-hee's dad that night. Despite Do-hee's father begging Gu-won to at least save his wife, Gu-won refused. Humans only get one contract. Shocked by what she just heard, Do-hee tries to act normal, but she can't see her life and Gu-won the same after learning what happened that night. After overhearing Do-hee crying, Gu-won feels guilty and goes to visit the priest, who warns him to stay away from Do-hee, and the priest also reminds Gu-won of Do-hee's parents' accident and his role in all of it. You see, Gu-won had not held on to the memory, and so he had no idea that he was involved with her parents' death up until this point. Finding Do-hee at Cheon-suk's grave, Gu-won was still shocked himself, and he overhears Do-hee wondering to Cheon-suk whether she would have fallen for him if she'd known what he had done. And it is here that Gu-won's heart breaks. The next day in Gu-won's office, Do-hee overhears a woman pleading with Gu-won to cancel her contract and let her live. Ruthlessly, Gu-won watches her die, and after all, demons don't have mercy, and that's not how it works. Horrified by his demon side, Do-hee looks around the office and realizes that all the beautiful golden clocks symbolize the contracts that he's made with the people that he has sent to hell, including her father. Her stomach turning, Do-hee rushes out of the office, realizing what she witnessed, and Gu-won chases after her, but it was too late, as Do-hee was afraid of Gu-won. Later, Gu-won waits outside Do-hee's office, and when she gets off work, he invites her to go on a walk with him. Avoiding the elephant in the room, Do-hee and Gu-won talk about their Christmas plans, and in the end, however, Gu-won asks Do-hee to save herself from the pain of their fate together and lets go of her hand, scared that being with Do-hee will only hurt her more and more. Feeling hurt and betrayed, but still in love with Gu-won, Do-hee was too scared to look back, calls out for him through her tears, but when she finally turned around, he was gone. As the days go on, Do-hee distracts herself from her all-consuming heartbreak by keeping busy, even going to see the chief prosecutor, who ironically turns out to be her original blind date, to press him to keep looking into Seok-min's death. Although she saw him fall off the building with her own two eyes, there are still too many unanswered questions. Despite keeping up a strong facade, both Da Ji-young and Seok-hoon worry about Do-hee. At the same time, after debating and debating, Bok-gyu finally decides to give Do-hee the cross necklace that Gu-won had kept in his office. Wearing the cross instantly triggers memories of Do-hee's past life as Wolshim, and experiencing and remembering Wolshim's love story with Yi-sun helps Do-hee understand Gu-won better. But going to their spot by the river, Do-hee was suddenly kidnapped by none other than Suk-min. Having survived with half of his face burnt off, it turns out that Suk-min had been hiding out amongst the homeless and plotting revenge this whole time, threatening to kill Do-hee unless Gu-won appears. When Gu-won arrives, furious and eyes burning red, he uses his powers to fight Suk-min, only not killing him when Do-hee begs him not to, worried about what will happen to Gu-won if he breaks the demon manual's code. In a tragic twist, Suk-min shoots Do-hee as he shields Gu-won, and unable to watch her die, Gu-won saves Do-hee by breathing his own life into her body, sacrificing himself. In the end, Do-hee had to watch as Gu-won begins to combust and disappear, leaving only his wedding ring behind. As all of their memories flashed before her, Do-hee was overwhelmed with grief, and even God was moved by his sacrifice. Back at Gu-won's office at the Suwol Foundation, all the golden clocks stopped ticking. Gu-won was really gone, and after Gu-won's death, the police arrive and arrest Suk-min. Laughing and ranting about how he had beaten the demon, the police and other authorities all consider him crazy and feel sorry for Do-hee, who was unable to talk about what happened and is deeply traumatized by Gu-won's death. While Suk-min was ultimately sentenced to death and condemned to spend the rest of his days being haunted by the ghost of Cheon-suk, Se-ra leaves the company and starts a home for child victims of domestic abuse, although not before apologizing to Do-hee. As we all come to learn, Do Ji-young was an abused young man who had been trying to save himself and his mom from Suk-min, while Se-ra had been a traumatized mother, terrified of her husband's evilness. At the same time, Soo-han, who had always been on Suk-min's side, abandons her brother, allying herself with Do-hee and Seok-hoon, who becomes the company's chairman to secure a better future for her children. However, as the days turn into weeks, Do-hee misses Gu-won more and more. When Christmas Day, the day that they have been so excited for, finally comes, Do-hee goes to visit their river spot, and seeing God, she sincerely begs God to give her a happy ending, and she misses Gu-won so much that she was willing to make any deal in order to get him back. Touched by her sincerity, God grants her wish, and unable to believe her eyes, Do-won was blown away when she sees Gu-won miraculously appear in front of her. And remember when Gu-won made a bet with God that if he could get his powers back, then he and Do-hee would be allowed to survive? Well, he won that bet, and so Do-hee was willing to make a deal to see Gu-won again, and God was touched and decides to give Gu-won his job as a demon back. Finally together again, Gu-won explains to Do-hee that her father had asked him to save his pregnant wife, and listening, Do-hee comes to understand that it was thanks to the contract that Gu-won and her father had made that she got to live and spend her childhood with her parents. Together, an ecstatic and very in love Gu-won and Do-hee celebrate Christmas and return to work, where they were enthusiastically welcomed, especially by Seok-hoon, who was over the moon to see Gu-won back. 4 months later, Gu-won and Do-hee have settled into a happy married life, as we see them kissing in the park, with God smiling down at them.
And with that, the movie ends. We hope you enjoyed our video. Watch the next recaps on the screen, and don't forget to subscribe for more amazing recaps. See you in the next one.